Hello YouTube. Tamriel was full of weapons, from axes to bows to swords and somehow not spears in most games. I don't know why. But one of the most interesting weapons in the Elder Scrolls universe is the sentient sword Umbra, a sword that after its creation became a sentient creature. Now if you've been following the channel for a while, you might think back to my older video about Akaviri Blooddrinker swords, which are also seemingly sentient, but this is a very different case, as this sword Umbra was made for a Daedric prince, only to then get a will of its own. So with that said, let's discuss the story of Umbra. So the sword Umbra. It's a very powerful sentient sword that we can find in Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim Anniversary Edition, and it plays a major role in the official Elder Scrolls novels, Infernal City and Lord of Souls. To the people of Tamriel, it's known as a Daedric artifact of the Daedric prince Clavicus Vile, the Daedric prince of trickery and bargains, but its origin story is very peculiar. You see, unlike some other Daedric artifacts, this sword was not created by Clavicus Vile himself, but it was rather forged for Clavicus Vile by a mortal, and during its creation the Daedric prince of trickery was tricked himself. You see, back in ancient times, likely somewhere during the late Meretic era, several thousands of years before the events of Skyrim, the Daedric prince Clavicus Vile was in a bit of a pickle. He was bored and he wanted to remedy that boredom by hitting two birds with one stone. He wanted to cause mischief on Tamriel and at the same time harvest souls for his Oblivion realm. So he had a great idea. What if I have an obscenely powerful sword made on Tamriel and make it harvest souls for me with every kill? Mortals will fight over it for its power, which would be super funny, and I will have souls. A win-win, so to say, at least for Clavicus Vile. But that's not quite how it panned out. You see, Clavicus Vile was said to have searched around Nirn for a very long time, as he needed some very competent mortal to forge him the sword, who would also be willing to follow his instructions. It's said that for years he couldn't find anyone, until he found the Reccomended witch Naenra Ware, a mortal sorceress who came to him after searching for years in frustration for someone to do his bidding. She was willing to strike a bargain with Clavicus Vile and forge him the sword, and Clavicus Vile was happy, and he gave her the instructions now to forge this soul-snaring sword. And Naenra went to work. She created a sword unlike any other, powerful without equal, and with the ability to steal souls for Clavicus Vile. But there was a problem. You see, the sword was extremely unstable, and any mortal who held it instantly went completely insane. Which is not quite what Clavicus Vile had in mind for his artifact's design, despite the fact that he probably found it very funny anyway. You see, the witch told Clavicus Vile that the amount of Daedric power in the sword needed to be contained. The way I understand it is that the sword was overflowing with so much unchecked Daedric power that it needed a counterweight of swords to make the sword stable and make mortals able to even wield it. And the Reccomended witch then told Clavicus Vile that in order to make the sword stable, he should imbue it with some of his own power, the raw power of a Daedric prince, that would be powerful enough to contain all the unchecked energy in the sword, enough of a counterweight. And Clavicus Vile did exactly that. He gave the Reccomended witch a part of himself and asked her to put it in the sword. But she tricked him, it seems, or perhaps she herself didn't completely understand what she was doing, as by putting a part of Clavicus Vile's Daedric prince essence in the sword became a sentient Daedric being which Clavicus Vile no longer had any control over and had its own will. It is this fact that led the people on Tamriel, who still tell of this legend, to speculate that there never was a Reccomended witch named Naenra Ware, but that the witch was simply Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness in disguise. The theory goes that Sheogorath had noticed Clavicus Vile had long searched for someone of great competence to do his bidding and forge his sword, and that Sheogorath saw Vile's frustration at not being able to find anyone as an opportunity to take the piss with him and prank him, which is what led to the sword becoming a sentient being calling itself Umbra. The legend says that Clavicus Vile had the witch executed for her trickery, but the damage was done, as the witch had hidden the sword away from Clavicus Vile and he'd permanently lost a part of himself, something that he's still very angry about years later, as he still wants that part of himself back and does not acknowledge the sword Umbra as its own being. In the Elder Scrolls novel Lord of Souls, he literally says, "First of all," Vile said, "let's not go calling anyone Umbra. There is no Umbra. This thing that suffers from the delusion that it has its own will, its own person, is actually nothing of the kind, do you understand? No more than a stone rolling down a hill is capable of self-locomotion, or an abacus of doing math by itself. What was in this sword was me, plain and simple. If you cut someone's leg off and the leg starts calling itself Umbra, it would still be their leg, wouldn't it? You wouldn't humor it, would you? Help it out with its delusions of grandeur? As you see, he's still pretty mad about the fact that he was tricked, and he really wants that part of his power that's now Umbra back. The sword would end up becoming one of Tamriel's legendary artifacts, apparently being able to change its own shape and size. It could appear as a long sword, short sword, black regular sword, but always in the shape of a sword. Now, over the centuries, Umbra used its sentience to find a worthy wielder for itself, to only then use its power to take over the wielder's mind and partly possess them. The sword would then force the wielder to kill, it seems, as the sword itself hungered for souls, or at least the spirit inside the sword, which was part of Clavicus Vile, hungered for souls. Now, it seems that the strength of the wielder also determines to an extent whether or not Umbra fully possesses them or not, because some previous wielders, when Umbra was inside the sword, the spirit was inside the sword, have outright become bloodthirsty and killed indiscriminately, while others were able to stay somewhat on the right path as long as they killed enough people, be it bandits or other evildoers, to keep the sword sated with souls. Although we do know that the spirit possessing the sword itself is not at all a good or nice spirit, it seems. You see, as I said, the sword and the spirit possessing it play a big role in the Elder Scrolls novels, Infernal City and Lord of Souls. Now, I won't fully spoil the story of those books, as I recommend you read them yourself if you're starved for Elder Scrolls content like all of us, and I'll dedicate a video to them with all the spoilers relatively soon, link in the description when I made that video. But I do give a very basic overview of Umbra's role in the books in this video, without specifying most of the story events, but I will reveal what Umbra's fate is by the final book. So stop watching the video right now if you want to read those stories yourself. Trust me, they're not as bad as some people claim they are, they're pretty good. Anyway, if you do want to stay and hear some of the spoilers, here we go. So what you need to know is that in the books, after the events of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, where the sword in one quest was returned to Clavicus Vile, which seems to have been the canon outcome of that quest, the sword eventually ended up in his realm of Oblivion. But instead of Clavicus Vile being able to put Umbra back in its place and restore his own power to him, the spirit Umbra managed to free itself and then trick Clavicus Vile by cutting away more of Vile's power, making Umbra even more powerful and allowing Umbra to leave the sword and manifest himself in the outside world. In the books, he's described as a dark being in the shape of a man with eyes like holes into nothing. In this shape, he managed to escape from Clavicus Vile's grasp and hid himself away in the dark reaches of his realm, using the prince's own power to make sure that he could not find him. But he was found, albeit not by the Daedric prince, rather he was found by two characters from the book, one of whom promised that he could help Umbra escape Vile's realm if he let him live. So Umbra let the man live, and from that point on he would go to cause quite some events, which we will describe in the video on the books. I know they have a bit of a bad rap, but really they aren't that bad, so give them a chance please, or wait till my video for them. Anyway, by the end of the book there occurs a mysterious event, because by the end of it, it seems that as if Umbra is destroyed and Clavicus Vile reclaims all his power. But somehow he doesn't seem to have reclaimed Umbra. As about 120 years after the story, the sword resurfaces yet again on Tamriel, though not with as much power as before, but the spirit Umbra still possesses the sword. I personally only see two explanations for this. Explanation 1, the spirit Umbra had gotten so strong and different from Clavicus Vile that he could not recapture the spirit, only the power that the spirit had later stolen. So the spirit then ended up returning, perhaps even cast out in frustration by Clavicus Vile after he discovered that he could not take that part of himself back, so he just threw it out. Or explanation 2, the witch who made it, or Sheogorath if it was him, assumed that Clavicus Vile would one day get his hands on the sword anyway and its spirit within, and thus they perhaps protected the sword spirit somehow against getting reabsorbed into Vile's being. Either way, I would not be surprised if we get to see the sword again in future games, whenever they finally come, or perhaps in future Elder Scrolls Online content, as they seem to shift to more smaller stories, and Umbra would be perfect for that. Anyway, that's about all I can say about Umbra, and I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this video and that I managed to teach you something new about the Elder Scrolls universe today. And if I did, why not subscribe to the channel and maybe give a like, as that's the way YouTube decides which content is worthy and which isn't. That being said, all there's left for me to do is to vocally thank my top Patreon supporters. Mr. Bernardo Binda, His Soul, Gabriel Binda, Doji, K-Legend Hunter Joe, King Chris, Lance Vandertooth, Volker of Argonia, RP the Beast, Devin Mattingly, Rakai, and Sword of Bushido. They and all the others on screen make my videos possible, and for that I am very grateful. That said, I'll see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Probably next week. Bye bye.